In this review, I'm going to give you everything you need to know about the Numark Mixtrack Pro FX. This is the new version of the very popular Mixtrack Pro controller. There were 3 controllers in the Mixtrack Pro series before this one, so this is the 4th one, and it's the best yet. In the next few minutes, I'll talk you through all the features of the controller. We'll go around the inputs and outputs. I'll show you some of the things that are new on it, and we'll talk about whether it's a good choice for you as the next purchase, or indeed very likely to be your first purchase, because it's an entry-level 2-channel DJ controller. As always, if you enjoy this, please do like, follow and share. So let's take a look at the unit and start talking around the features of it. So its build quality for something which costs $199 is very good. The unit has a feel which is really not much different to the Pro Pioneer gear, in that it's plastic, but it's got a brushed kind of metal feel on the top here. It's very hard to make it creak when you pick it up and, you know, bend it a bit. It just feels like it's well made. Certainly it's the best made Mixtrack Pro that we've ever seen out of the 4 that have now been released. Indeed, we're still using the previous model in our training here, and it's now 5 years old. So there's a testament to the way these things are built. Yes, it's lightweight, yes, it's consumer, but it's going to last. That said, don't try and use this in a club night after night. That's not what it's built for. It has 2 channels, and it's not designed to control more than 2 channels. It comes with Serato DJ Lite software, which is a program that's got everything you need to begin your DJing journey, but you are going to want to upgrade the software at some point that comes with this controller, because it does have limitations. For instance, you can't record on that software at all, and the loop length, don't go high enough and don't go low enough. There's just niggles which over time you're going to want to upgrade the software in order to get around. And upgrading to Serato DJ Pro normally costs $99. That said, they've always got offers on, so if you do buy this, hang around for the next offer and get it when it's a little bit cheaper. So 2-channel Serato controller. Let's have a look at the features. So to start with, let's look at the inputs and outputs. So around the back, there is a USB to go into your computer. This takes the power as well, because there's no external power for this. All the power comes from your computer. There are 2 RCA sockets which plug into your speakers. So the speaker output is here, and there's no way of having it playing through your laptop. You need to have speakers plugged in as well to hear what this thing is doing. Powered speakers are a great choice, because you can just plug the other end of this right into the back of them and you're off. So around the front is the headphones, and the headphones has got an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch socket on here, which means that you don't need to worry about an adapter to get any headphones working with it. There's also a microphone socket, which is around the back here, so you can plug in a mic. The microphone volume is up here, and the master volume is here for the unit. So that's all the inputs and outputs and the main volume controls. Let's now talk through the features. So the biggest, literally, part of the controller are these jog wheels. They're 6-inch jog wheels. They're much bigger than on the previous Mixtrack. They're a really good part of this. They've got a really nice weight to them. They just feel high quality. You know, to have this kind of jog wheel on a controller like this in the past was something that just wasn't heard of. It's one of the big pluses of the Numark Mixtrack Pro. If jog wheels are important to you, if having a good feel when you're DJing is important to you, you're going to love that, because they just feel the part. But not only that, your pitch faders, which adjust the speed of the playing track, are also really long throw, which means they've got a lot of movement, so it means you can adjust the pitch very finely, and they just feel good. So the pitch faders as well are awesome. Now, you might have noticed, especially if you have seen or even got a previous Mixtrack, that the decks, this is a deck and this is a deck, which control your jog wheel and your transport controls, which we'll get onto, are identical. In other words, the controls are laid out the same way on each. That's actually unusual, or rather it would have been unusual a few years ago. It seems to be the way DJ controllers are going. You see, in the past, you might have had this fader here, so that they were in a way symmetrical. Imagine a mirror down the middle, and then they look the same. But nowadays, people tend to prefer this layout, where it's almost like you could physically move the decks apart and have 2 identical decks, but instead they are pushed together into one unit. So that's a change from the previous Mixtrack. So let's take a look at the basic DJing functions on here, the stuff you're going to use again and again, day after day. So each channel has got the gain control, which is called level here. It's basically the channel input, and you're always going to want to set the channel input control so that this level here is not going into the red or the white as it is on this controller. And that's now set correctly for this channel. And then everything else you do with the volume controls should be okay. So that's what this one's for. It's kind of the master input. And these are used to balance the two decks. You might have something on this deck that's quieter than this one. So that's what these levels are for. So you have your gain or level control. Then you have your bass, mid and treble, which cut and boost the 3 frequencies. And you have a nice big fat filter, which in the middle is off, and in each direction engages a different filter. That's a low pass filter, lets the low frequencies through, and a high pass filter, lets the high frequencies through. It's kind of got a resonance, got a nice musical feel that you don't get when you're adjusting the EQs with just the standard EQs. So having filters here is something, again, that's come into DJ controllers in recent years, and these are really nice. They're really big. You know, you want a big filter that you're encouraged to go and grab there. So the volume faders here and the crossfader, they are cheap feeling, especially they're not replaceable. They're not like the silky smooth buttery faders you get on high-end mixes, but they do the job just fine. And certainly for beginner to intermediate DJs, and even once you've gone past this, you won't have a problem with these. They're just clearly not the ones that cost an awful lot of money that are fitted to high-end gear, but they do the job just fine. So this is your general inputs and outputs for each channel. Everything comes through here, and off to the master volume and comes out to your speakers. So as well as the inputs and outputs, the mixer has got this effects section in the middle. So the effects here are very different to the way effects have been done previously on any DJ controller. And I want to talk a little bit about these because you're either going to love these or you're going to hate them. So let's talk about the differences and where this kind of came from. So originally, DJ controllers had big effects sections on them above each jog wheel, and they control loads of things. You could have like 3 effects, and you could assign them to different decks, and there's all these kind of like myriad controls there, and nobody used them because they were too complicated. Because even on pro gear, the effects were far more immediate in the DJ booth. You could just press a button and get on with it. And over time, DJ controller manufacturers kind of realized that maybe that wasn't the best way to do them. So they tried to experiment, started doing different things. Pioneer did it with its range, its DDJ 400, 800 and 1000, and the 1000 SRT for Serato have got a new way of doing effects which is far closer to the way effects are on pro DJ gear in the DJ booth. However, Numark has gone for a different approach by rethinking the effects on this unit and its sister unit, the Numark Platinum FX. So what's it done? Well, it's added paddles. These are called paddles. Now, these are very similar to the paddles on battle mixers like the DJ S9 from Pioneer and the Numark Scratch. And these are favored by Scratch DJs because they're so immediate. Let me show you what I mean. Let's just start that track playing again. So with a paddle, you select the effect you want. Let's say we want a high pass filter, and you turn it on like this, and you turn it off by letting go. Can't get more immediate than that, right? All the effects are the same. There's our echo. There's our reverb, big room reverb effect. And there's a flanger and a phaser. And for completion's sake, there's a low pass filter as well. Now, there are a couple of controls to adjust these. There's a dry wet control that decides how much of the sound is heard over the original. So when that's off, it's not going to have any effect at all. When it's all the way on, it's going to be extreme. So somewhere in the middle is normally going to be right, but you're going to choose where you set this depending on the effect that you're trying to get. And there's a beats control which decides how many times the effect cycles or how often it plays against the number of beats. So you could have this set to kind of playing every beat or every 4 beats or whatever. And you can see that on the screen when I move it. Those beats numbers in the middle of the screen on the left and right are moving together there between the various values that we can have. So for instance, on an echo, that's going to make a big difference. We'll trigger the echo on here now with the beat set where it is there. Let's actually set it to echo. Quite a quick echo out, but if I set the beats to a higher amount, so let's now set the beats up to, you know, every 8 beats, this is going to be a huge length of echo that we hear now when I turn this on. Turn the music off now so you can hear the echo. And you can hear that's echoing out literally every 8 beats. So the beats control decides basically how quickly the effect cycles. All right then, so they all look quite good, don't they? You've got these 2 paddles. The paddles have got 2 settings. So setting number 1 on the paddle is the one I've been showing you. On, take your hand off and it disappears. Setting number 2, it locks. So you can take your hand away. So these look pretty good, don't they? What's the downside? Well, the downside is that Serato has got 2 effects engines, and that means even Serato DJ Lite, the software that's provided with this, which we'll get on to talking about in a minute, has got 2 effects engines, and that means it's got 2 different effects units that can be applied to the channels and so on. Each of them can have up to 3 effects running on them. However, in this unit, you can only trigger 1 effect. Not per deck, but for the whole unit. So if I set that to the high pass filter there, that's the only effect that's going to be triggered on either deck for the whole session until I change it to something else. So there's clearly a limitation, there's a compromise that's been made here to implement the effects in this way. Some people, that's going to be an absolute deal breaker. I actually love it. I think it's brilliant. I think effects get overused. I think apart from for very specialized styles of DJing, you don't need all that effects control. And guess what? This is right there. It's right at your fingertips. It's really simple to use. And especially with the filters, because we've already looked at the filter controls, right? These are the filters here. These are awesome for big sweeping changes, right? But if you just want to quickly stick a high pass filter over a hi-hat, it's very hard to do it with these because you can't quickly turn it off and on to where you got it set to in the way you can with this control. So the immediacy, the kind of on-off immediacy, especially on the filters, I found to be really cool. But of course, I won't need to convince any DJ who's a scratch DJ who's used paddles and thinks they're brilliant. They don't appear on any other DJ controller. This is unique, apart from its sister controller, the Platinum FX, as I was saying. And they're a point of difference for this. Overall, as I say, I think they're pretty awesome, but some people won't like the way that's done at all because it's very limiting. Of course, you can always trigger the effects by pressing them in the software itself. You've got all the other effects here. And you can see here, there's only 1 effect on. The high pass filter is there, on, off, on, off. That's the left-hand paddle I'm pressing and the right-hand paddle. And it's not even allowing me to use any of the others. When I change the effect, it just changes that 1 effect. There's 3 effects on each side there, you can see. So yeah, they're limited, but I like them. So that's how the effects work in this unit. So the next thing I want to move on to talking about is the pads. Because the pads here are kind of good and they're kind of an improvement on the pads on the previous Mixtrack, but they are limited and it's mainly to do with the software. So let me explain what I mean by that. So pads on DJ controllers are here so that you can trigger usually samples, but also maybe loops, auto loops, and on more featured DJ controllers, there's things like slicer, and you can even have effects that are on various pads that are kind of one-touch effects. None of that really carries across to the Serato DJ Lite software and therefore to the implementation here. So to start with, what we've got here is pretty limited. But that said, they do cover the main things you're going to need: cues, loops, sampler, and there's also a new feature called fader cuts that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. But the biggest limitation is, look, you see 8 pads and you think, oh, I can control 8, for instance, 8 cue points. So I can have 8 different cue points in my track and move to them. So if you want a quick primer on what cue points are, on the screen now is my track, and I'm right at the beginning of it. There you go, I'm at the beginning of that track there. If I want to put a cue point there, then I press the cue button here, and then I press one of these top 4. So that one there is now a cue point. So that will now trigger that first point in my track whenever I press it. And of course I can press those anywhere in the track, and it means I can quickly jump to parts of my track. So cue points are really good, and they get saved when you turn off your controller, turn off your computer. When you load that track again, they're still there. They're still in the track. The little marks are still on the waveform. So cue points are very useful. But when you look at this, you might think, hey, I'm going to get 8. Not so. And the reason you don't get 8 is the software doesn't let you do it. The software only lets you have 4. So what they've done here is, because when you plug it in out of the box with the light software that comes with it, you are limited. What they've done here is give you 4 functions on the bottom ones that are pretty lame, really. The 4 functions on the bottom ones are just to fill the space because they're not going to work as cues. So for instance, if I hit play on there, this one here will fast forward through the track and it go backwards again. You can see that on the screen. But guess what? So will my jog wheel. So that's pretty pointless. And this one here will go back to the beginning of the track. Gone all the way back to the beginning, you can see it on the screen. But guess what? Holding down shift and pressing Q will do the same thing, and has done on Serato controllers for many years now. So really, they've kind of shoved functions in on those bottom cue pads because they had to put something on them, and they can't use them for the functions I'm about to show you. Look, all that said, if you were upgrading to Serato DJ Pro, they suddenly become proper pads. So you now have 8 pads you can use for all the functions that you get in Serato DJ Pro. So it's really a labeling thing, and not to confuse beginners who will use this, not, you know, scratching their heads if they weren't labeled and given another function. All right then, so that limitation explained, let's talk about what's good about this, what's changed about this that I like. So the first thing that's changed is they've added a new layer of control buttons above the 8 cue points. They weren't here on the previous controller, and they were convoluted, kind of holding down shift and pressing things to get the various functions. What these do is decide what these do. So in other words, if I press Q, then now these are the cue points that I've talked to you about. So I hit play on here. We already know this one that I've set will jump back to the beginning, but I could set another one a little bit further on in the track, set it here, there you go. That will jump back to that point, and that one will still jump back to the beginning. If I want to get rid of the cue points, I hold down shift and press the cue point, and it deletes it. That light's now gone off and it's been deleted. These lights are only red. You don't get red, green, blue, in other words, multicolour that you get on more expensive controllers. They're just one colour lights. All right, so that's what cue points are. The next one is auto loop. So auto loop will automatically loop the track at the point that I press the auto loop button. So that's given me a 2-beat loop. If I were to press the one next to it, it will halve that loop length. It's now a 1-beat loop, and you can see on the waveform it's looping a single beat. If I press this one, it will loop 4 beats. And I press this one, it's now looped 8 beats. So these are a way of controlling a loop that is tied to the beat of the track. Now, I'm going to show you another way of doing that I think is probably easier in a minute, but that is there as well. Let's move on to sampler. I'll leave fader cuts to the end. So sampler, or sample, controls the sample slot inside the unit. Now a sample slot is a little place where you can put usually a short piece of audio. It could be a DJ ident or a DJ drop. It could be, you know, the classic cliched foghorn. It could be a spin back sound. Doesn't matter. It's something that you want to just drop in over your music. So the sample slot is a useful thing to have for mobile DJs and also to spice up your sets. And the way it works in Serato DJ Lite is really simple. We click sample on there, and if you look on the screen now, I will click the little foghorn at the top, and where my pointer is, there are 3 samples loaded, and this sample slot here is empty. So let's load one onto that empty sample slot. So I'm going to go to where I know I've got some samples in this folder here. Find one. Let's load a gunshot. This gunshot here, I'm going to load onto this sample slot here. That's now loaded up onto there. And by pressing sample and then the 4th pad, because I loaded it onto the 4th slot, we should hear a gunshot. And I can't hear that now, which is strange. I ought to be able to. In the software, there is a little mute button here, which I've just turned off. and that'll be why. I don't actually know why that was on. I don't remember pressing it, but anyway, that mutes all your sample slots. So let's try again. There we go. There's our gunshot. And I've got a few more samples loaded here. There's that foghorn or that siren, which you can see on the screen. You can see as I play it, the bar moves along, showing you that that's playing. And I've got a spin back as well. That kind of classic DJ spin back noise. Although, to be fair, you can easily do a spin back yourself on the track just by spinning back the jog wheel. Guess what? So they're there for you to put whatever you want on. And Serato DJ Lite does come with some samples from a company called Loop Masters, which you can just grab and drop on there. So the samples work pretty well. They've got their own volume control in the software as well, which was near that mute button that I had to unpick a second ago. Here's the volume control. It lets you just adjust the volume of that over the music, because of course you'll normally be playing these over music. And there's samples working on both decks as well. So of course there are slots over here on the pads for this deck. Everything I'm showing you here also happens over here on this deck. Right, the one I haven't shown you is the fader cuts. Now fader cuts are a pretty cool little effect. So fader cut is, there's an effect called transform that you see on Pro DJ gear. And transform will cut the beat or cut the music in and out in relation to the beat. So say you have your transform set to a quarter, then every beat, every do, it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll cut it in and out 4 times. And that will give you a kind of stuttered or gated effect. It's quite often called a gator as well. So the transform effect or the gator effect or the gate effect, if you know either of those, well, this is what this is. The reason it's called fader cuts is that that is something that pro scratch DJs do. They cut the fader in and out over the beat. So here's the crossfader. That's a fader cut. It's quite a short, quite a slow one. And that's what these buttons do here. They do it for you. So they do that very quickly to save you having to do it. And as you go up, they do it faster and faster. Now, depending on what source material you use, that might sound good or it might sound a bit meh like that. It's good on vocals, it's good on acapellas. You can use it to chop up a vocal and make a vocal sound quite interesting by just holding down that button. And of course it saves you having to do it manually, especially if you're not a scratch DJ. So it's a nice little function. It reminds me of the kind of Jazzy Jeff scratch button that Pioneer put on a controller a while back. Again, it will divide people. I think it's quite nice. And especially if you combine it with your filters and your effects, you could get some nice effects by chopping up a vocal, for instance, by holding down a fader cut button, filtering it, and maybe putting some echo on it. So a nice thing to have, a nice little effect to play with there on this area. So what else have we got here? Well, we've got loop here, which is new. This, I've already shown you how to get auto loop going on here. This is basically the same thing. And indeed, when you turn auto loop on here and set a loop setting, these settings change. You see the loop setting here is turning it on and off here. They're just duplication of the same thing, but nonetheless they're pretty good. So if we want to loop the currently playing track, I'll just hit loop, and on the screen at the top, because I'm on the left hand deck now, you can see I've already got that loop set on the right hand deck as well, but this is the left hand deck. It's now looping. Now if I want to halve the length of that loop, I press this button here, which is half, and again we'll halve it again until it's at the lowest value. And the lowest value on Serato DJ Lite is one beat, which you can see there, and then double. So you've seen this before, I showed it to you on the pads. It's just another way of doing it. It's a limitation of Serato DJ Lite. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'd like to see this going down to like half a beat, a quarter of a beat, an eighth of a beat, because that's a classic effect, but you'd need to upgrade the software to get that to work in that way. So the loop controls there are nice to have because they weren't on the last mix track and you had to use the pads, and it's actually more useful to have it on separate buttons, because you could have the pads, for instance, permanently set to Q, never worry about them, and your looping's there somewhere else. All right then, they're the biggest changes here. They're the biggest improvements, the effects section and the way that the pads have been improved. But I just want to quickly talk you around some of the other stuff on this controller if you're not familiar with it, so that we've completed the review by going over all the other features. So what else have we got? Well, these are our controls for our headphones. So you have a Q button, which lets you choose which deck you hear in your headphones, because of course, if you're playing this deck here with the crossfader over there, the audience is hearing this out the speakers. But if you then press Q here, Then this deck is the one that you'll hear coming out of your headphones, which lets you get your music ready. And these controls around here control that. So Q Mix decides whether you hear 100%, whatever source this button is set to, or whether there's a mix of that and the master output. And this is your volume control for the headphones. So this is the headphone area here. Now these controls here on each deck are called pitch bend. They just basically slow the track down momentarily or speed it up momentarily, so you can use these for manually beat mixing if you don't want to use the jog wheel to do this. Talking about the jog wheels, let's just give you a quick primer on how they work if you haven't used a jog wheel like this before. Generally, a jog wheel will slow the track down if you hold it at the edge and speed it up if you move it that way. If you grab it at the top, it stops the track for scratching and that kind of thing. That's what this big button does here. Turn that off, now the whole jog wheel is that slow down and speed up. And this is a personal preference thing. It's called the scratch button, sometimes called the vinyl button as well. It's also got a function called bleep on it, and all the words written underneath the buttons are when you hold the shift down. So shift and that will play the track backwards momentarily. And the idea is if you know there's a swear word or a curse word coming up, you go like that, and people can't hear it because it plays the previous part of the track backwards for a second and then it jumps to pass the swear word afterwards. So that's what that does. We then have, holding down shift, we can change the pitch range, which is how far this slows or speeds the track up. We can lock or unlock the musical key, which decides whether the pitch of the track goes up or down as you change its speed here. And that's pretty much it for the extra controls, other than controlling looping manually. So by holding down shift and pressing these loop buttons, you can change the in and out point of the loop. So if I was to go to the screen again here, look at the loop at the top. I'm going to hold down shift and press the in button here. You see what I'm doing on my hand there, shifting the in button. Now when I move the jog wheel, I can change the in point of the loop. See that in point moving? And if I do the same, shift and out and hold down the jog wheel, I can change the out point of the loop. This is useful if you're trying to get a nice clean manual loop over a track where the beat hasn't been guessed properly by the software, so that you can get that sounding nice and sweet. And apart from a quick look at how the library works, because there are controls here to save you having to go to the computer. You've seen me loading tracks here by just going to the software and grabbing my mouse fader here and just grabbing the track and loading it. But there is an easy way of loading tracks by using controls on the unit. So they're at the very top of the unit. Up here is a browse button, and when we turn the browse button, it will move on the screen through the tracks. And when I press the browse button down, it will move to the folders at the side of the screen. So I can choose which folder I want to select a track from. Press it down again, it moves back to what's in the folder or what's in the playlist. So that's how you kind of navigate the library. And to load, you just press load 1 or load 2, and it will decide which deck it loads that track to depending on which one you press. So if I press load 1, that track that I just pressed there has now loaded onto deck 1, and I'm now ready to play that track here. So that's the Mixtrack Pro FX. I mean, it's called the Pro FX because effects are the thing about this. That new effects section in the middle is something that is totally different to any other controller, other than, as I say, it's sister controller, so it's unique. The plus points of this, the build quality is really cool. It is a consumer controller. It's not made for night after night use. You probably will trash it if you're DJing 6 hours a night on it. But look, it's going to last you years if it's looked after properly at home and used for occasional parties and so on. The jogs and faders on this are excellent, really, truly excellent. The weighting's nice on them. They're just really, really cool. There's no problem at all with those at any price point. This price point, it's just really, really good. So I like that. I love the new effects. I think for this kind of controller and for this level, this is exactly what you want. They're easy to use. You've got all the main stuff there, and that's just all awesome. Yes, you don't have the flexibility of Pro effects, but hey, for most users, they're just not going to care about that. So the downsides of this, the Serato DJ Lite software provided with it is not the best. It's got no record function for recording your sets. You can connect it to Tidal and SoundCloud to get music there, so you don't have to have your local music, which is a good thing. But that is one of the only you know, what are the only things that that won't in the end annoy you, because there's lots and lots of stuff where it says you're going to need to get the Pro version of this to use this. You click on something and at the bottom it says upgrade to use this feature, and that will start to annoy you. And the big thing that annoys me is the lack of being able to get the loops small enough or big enough. Look, that's the point of this. You're meant to upgrade at some point, and as I said earlier, you can usually find a deal on that. So just bear in mind you're not getting the full software with this when you buy it. And that's pretty much the roundup of this thing. It's an awesome value controller if Serato is what you want to go for. The bigger question here is, do you want to go for Serato at all? Because if not, you might want to look at the Pioneer DDJ 400, which is for Pioneer's own record box software, and that contains that comes with the full software, so you get a lot more in the box than you would with this. Or if you do want that effects control back, if you do want to have the kind of traditional effects, the Pioneer DDJ SB3, which is a similar entry-level controller for Serato DJ Lite. It's got the same limitations on the pads because that's a limitation of the software. You can only control 4 on that controller as well. But it does have, above the jog wheels, control over the effects in a way that this doesn't. And finally, do you go for this or do you go for the Mixtrack Platinum FX? The Mixtrack Platinum FX is a device that's got built-in displays here, which are quite cool, although they're inessential. But also it works with 4 decks. Now this is a 2-deck controller. It's designed only to control 2 decks in Serato DJ Pro. So even if you upgrade to DJ Pro, which has potentially got 4 decks, this is only designed to control 2 of them. But the Mixtrack Platinum FX, the controller that looks just like this, but it's $50 more, well, that has got 4 decks. It's got buttons to switch to the other decks, and therefore if DJing on 4 decks is something that you might want in the future, out of all the controllers I've just mentioned, that's the only one that does it. So you might want to make that $50 upgrade. That's our review of the Numark Mixtrack Pro FX. If you've enjoyed this, again, please do like, follow, share. Underneath, I've got links to other related videos and also to the full review written up over on the Digital DJ Tips website. Meanwhile, get good, get out there and make the moments. I'll see you again soon.